Welcome back to Capital Conversations. I'm Marty Owens. It's Tuesday, April 2nd, 2013, and I'm pleased tonight to be joined by Dan Feidt. He's from Occupy Minnesota and a number of other efforts around the state. You were telling me before the first segment tonight that there's some stuff going on around mining and pipeline stuff down southern. Tell me what's going on down there and what's not being reported by the mainstream media.
Well, this is actually a very crucial big week for this whole situation. A lot of different people around the Twin Cities and more broadly in the state have been working against, not just frac sand mining that you talked about and trying to mitigate that or sort of try to get our society pointed a little ways away from fossil fuels and these dangerous practices. But also there's actually a very dangerous tar sands pipeline called Enbridge Line 67, the Alberta Clipper, which comes down from the tar sands fields up in Canada and then crosses through the area near Bemidji. And so what they're trying to do, the public comment period at the Public Utility Commission closes on Friday. So there's going to be a rally downtown.
So known as the PUC.
Yeah, the PUC. To basically, what Enbridge is trying to do is expand the capacity of this pipeline, like dramatically increase the amount of what's called tar sands bitumen being pushed through it, which they sort of spin as being the same as crude oil, although it's not. It's a lot more dangerous.
Well, who's down there now?
Well, there's a lot of people working on it right now.
At the public hearings, who were they hearing from?
They have been hearing from a lot of different constituents, and so they had public hearings kind of up in the northern area, and so people came out from the Native community, from the sort of different climate change groups that have started working on this. And also, I should mention, I was able to go up for a day. There's been a camp that's been set up near Leonard, Minnesota, which is between kind of Bemidji and Grand Forks, and it's a camp supported by people from the Red Lake tribe as well as the Indigenous Environmental Network, people that have worked on the tar sands blockade, people that have worked in Occupy. A lot of people have been coming through this camp because it's on a piece of land that has no easement. So these pipelines run by Enbridge have no legal right to be operated, and it's Red Lake ceded land, so it's akin to reservation land on this parcel. And so they've sort of made a statement that this camp is part of an instance of resistance with Indigenous and allies. And so that's been going on since February 28th, but it's been really hard to break it into the media. Like the Star Tribune has talked about this controversy going on with these pipelines, but they won't even tell people that there's a whole camp set up.
They haven't sent any reporters up there?
No, they have not.
So how many people are up there and what do they hope to accomplish now?
I'd say on any given night there's quite a few. It sort of varies depending on how tough the weather has been. But they're trying to sort of help with the Red Lake Nation put more pressure on Enbridge so that either these pipelines get shut down or the Red Lake people get a fair treatment from Enbridge, which otherwise Enbridge has basically no incentive to actually respect their sovereign treaty rights. And so that's sort of the idea. But also to raise awareness because people are starting to resist the Keystone XL pipeline and the northern effort north of Cushing, Oklahoma to build this other huge tar sands pipeline. In the meantime, Line 67 is a crucial part of the whole tar sands network.
So when you talk about Indigenous and allies being up there, are we talking about Occupy people or are we talking about environmentalists? Who's involved?
There are people that there's different people that are involved in different kind of like formal levels, like climate change activists and stuff.
Yeah, but somebody's camping up there, right? Who are those folks?
The bottom liner people are Red Lake folks, people with Indigenous Environmental Network, which was sort of a spin-off of the American Indian movement that started in the early 90s. So those kind of folks have really been the bottom liners. But people from Occupy Minnesota, Occupy Minneapolis have also gone up there, done like logistics, media work, kind of helped know some things about how to get a camp going, so they've worked with that. And so Occupy Minneapolis meets every week on Wednesdays at 4200 Cedar Avenue, which is a new community center that was set up after Walker Church burned down last summer. And so that's kind of been a pretty informal kind of space where a lot of different projects, a lot of different networks of people, like Idle No More, Welfare Rights Committee, WHAM, and anti-war people. It's sort of a place where all these sort of smaller things can kind of tie in, share resources, sort of cross-pollinate ideas. I think that's helped build a more responsive and kind of networked effect where people, regardless if it has like an Occupy name or not, people are starting to get motivated. If people are coming out of the winter, people are starting to make things happen. So
well, let's talk about the the Occupy Sandy thing. What's going on there? What's the deal with the? I think you're talking about Hurricane Sandy, right? Yep, the efforts that are going on. What's going on there that's not being reported in the media?
Well, I think a lot of times Occupy sort of formed as a response to a sort of disaster capitalism, what Naomi Klein has called the shock doctrine. And so what that means is that as social crises accelerate and kind of corporate forces organize to kind of take away the commons and take away people's, sovereignty over their land, in the case of indigenous people, people's homes, making people homeless, all of this stuff is sort of an example of the shock doctrine. So with Sandy, a disaster came in and a hurricane, wiped out all these areas, and, the powerful people in New York, developers, people that are aligned to powerful local politicians, wanted to kind of pressure people to not be able to live in those areas and basically prevent more rebuilding in places like New Jersey as well. And so Occupy Sandy sort of brought the idea of these Occupy camps and what you call comfort stations, food stations, set those up, was used in dealing with them ruggedly. And when the police aren't trying to crush little setups like that, it seems almost easy to do, even when there's not electricity. And so those kind of like survival and comfort stations were kind of the first thing that people plugged in and started doing. And then people started organizing teams, working with other locals, going door to door to check on elderly people that were shut in buildings that they couldn't get up and down and stuff. So that was the kind of logistical thing that developed.
I was going to ask you about that because the thought occurred to me, that if there's a native distrust of the government for whatever reason, justified or not, you do have people in the government that are trying to do good. So let's say, for instance, there are places in Ward 9 or in the Sandy, devastated area of Sandy, that really shouldn't be occupied by human beings because of the danger that exists there. Do you reconcile that? Do you consider it? Who do you believe? Want to get your own scientists or
like an eminent domain in a floodplain, like that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm thinking, exactly, where it poses a danger to people to be there. I mean, do you buy any of that?
Well, it seems like the agenda of powerful people in New York to kind of turn over and redevelop those areas in a different way, as opposed to leaving them as empty.
So they say it's not occupiable, and then there's a development going
right behind it. Exactly.
Right. Okay. I see where you're going.
So I mean, it seems like that's been a pretty consistent pattern going on, and you see that after many natural disasters in the U.S. But at the same time, too, with things involving Occupy and stuff, people are okay. Like a lot of people are okay with working with people that have different roles in society. Like people that worked with governmental relief were able to work with Occupy Sandy, people, not always smoothly and not in deference to what those people wanted to do. But people are always, I think, willing to see if they can cooperate, see where they can do things differently, and not just kind of be hushed for the sake of it, know? And I think that when that works well, it can be pretty dynamic. And the same thing is true whether it's the government or, the nonprofit sector or other political sectors. But at the same time, people want to be independent and have their own voice,
Right. Well, let me ask you about that. So there's this, maybe an innate desire to want to be cooperative, and yet, let's talk about the movement as a whole. You've got, Occupy MN is one piece of it, as a piece of a larger movement, and yet you've got all these loose confederations of different ancillary groups and trying to get them to work for. And you've had your own struggles recently. Can we talk just a little bit about what's going on there?
Well, and also, Occupy is sort of a word that isn't always applied to things where a lot of the same ideals are shared in different places as well.
Right, so, you may have very different ideas about what that means. I get that.
That's true. Well, there was a case where basically one of the things I've done since Occupy Wall Street started at a national level is work on the media stuff. So help develop live video, live stream, that kind of thing. And so part of that has just sort of been about developing editorial approaches where there's independence and accountability and sort of a certain coherency of the editorial process in terms of how a Facebook page or a Twitter account is used. And so
when you say that means keeping it clean of corporate influence or money or what?
That can definitely be part of it for sure. For example, when I was in New York, I blocked our video collective called Global Revolution TV. The block in Occupy is where you have serious moral or ethical concerns about something. And we were sort of trying to figure out who should be our fiscal sponsor. And a very large and pretty powerful group called the Tides Foundation wanted to come in and be Global Rev's fiscal sponsor. But I knew that, you know, the Tides Foundation is kind of an establishment NGO. Like, they're very much part of a firmament that is kind of has a lot of power in sort of the left, basically. And I said, I'd really rather not deal with Tides. I think we can find someone better. And we were able to find a video collective called Deep Dish TV, which had an office right next to us that distributes documentaries around the world. And they were a much better match. And so that's the example of kind of the sort of wanting to find a more independent sort of process and working a little more horizontal way, not just with big boys. But
okay. But your own story, it's come home locally. You've got some issues.
Yeah. What I would say is the majority of the people that were involved in administering, you know, one Facebook and one Twitter account, the Occupy MN Facebook and Twitter, just decided that for certain, you know, moral and ethical reasons, we couldn't share an editorial process with Occupy Homes, which has sort of evolved in more the direction of a bit of more of a conventional nonprofit. Yeah. And so we just decided that we really need to have a separate editorial process for those things. And so we made a statement about that, but that was related to sort of community tensions that have been going on. And on the live stream that you can watch at livestream.com/OccupyMN, a very multi-sided debate about a whole bunch of different issues came up. And I think it'll probably be talked about again on April 10th. And everyone's invited down to 4,200 seater in the evening. There's a good potluck. Well, if you want to come down.
Yeah, I should. Yeah. I mean, I follow all of the stuff you guys got going on, but my curiosity in this is that, you know, while the hearts are in the right place, sometimes there's divisions about how to do things and to get the results you want and the ways you want to get them. And if there are these fundamental principle debates within your group, at what point do you reach where you coalesce and say, you know, or whatever, you go, hey, look, this issue is larger than our individual disagreements about this. Therefore, you know, we're going to tolerate some things. And at which point do you say, I can't tolerate this influence or that? What's the threshold? What's the?
I think.
Are you dealing with it one-off?
Well, yeah, right. Every situation is different, you know.
Sure.
And I mean, for example, another example going on in Minneapolis, the IWW has organized within Sisters Camelot, which is a mobile, you know, food shelf, and canvassers who raised the money said, we want to be part of the IWW, and then the sort of collective that runs Sisters Camelot said, all right, one of your people, we're just going to fire him right away. And so then they went on strike, you know. And so that's another thing where it's a conflict between people that, you know, reflects larger tensions and issues. And yet, at the same time, you know, those canvassers felt really motivated that they had to do that. And we should, you know, respect people's prioritization of these things.
Yeah.
But, you know, so I think, you know, things develop organically. And I think that in the time that's been going on, like both the positives and the negatives have really, you know, come into a big discussion in the Occupy stuff, and I think, you know, it works out, and we've been trying to, you know, communicate and have big discussions and see what we can cooperate on, but just work independently. There's two different wheels that are just, you know, turning independently with more accountability and that kind of thing.
Well, I just wonder about, you know, like talk a little bit about the structure of your, you know, so you know, you're like in heavy into the media side, but you've got some kind of leadership, policy, people are just kind of doing the soldier work, you know, getting out there and occupying space, or, you know, setting up those comfort booths, or the, you know, helping out with food shelves, whatever that is. What you know, we talked about this last time you were a year ago. The lack of kind of organizational structure across, because of the differences. Has that gotten any better? Has it changed? Is there anything new in the movement?
Well, I think, and another thing too is that I sort of tend to see Occupy more as something like a network than a movement. It's like, if you imagine like an ecosystem going on, Occupy is like a new layer of a weird subversive fungus between different sort of entities, you know?
Well, that's an interesting, nice description.
Fungal network.
Yeah, exactly.
It always seemed to kind of spread that way, rhizomes or whatever, you know? Right. And so, like I said, I think people that have different visions of what all that's about can still find lots of ways to cooperate, but you know, it's just kind of one-offs. You do sort of keep winging it, and but I think it's just good to have that stuff on the table. You know, I think people have a tendency to not always want to just sort of talk about things, and that can be that can really prevent things from getting resolved. So
well, let's talk about that for a second, because you know, despite your detachment from the Occupy Homes folks, you're
just in an editorial way.
Well,
like
you're still posting stuff on their, you know, on
Right.
Facebook about their different get-togethers and stuff like that.
It's just an independent editorial process, but in a more complex situation. But that's really just what the immediate little thing is about.
And yet the video showed that there were some people at that meeting that had very serious concerns about the differences. So has there been any progress there?
I mean, you know,
well, you're in
dialogue.
dialogue.
So. Yeah, you know, people are talking, you know, and I would say too, like Occupy Homes has done a pretty good job of rolling out the idea of a foreclosure-free zone, and which I think is, you know, it's really important to work on these housing issues, and there's been, you know, they're getting good traction on that. So, you know, I think that people are, you know, working on a lot of different projects, and we're just having a little different independent media. So.
Okay. So what else is going on in the Occupy MN space that people should be interested in?
Right. I wanted to mention too. There's still a lawsuit going on about the Drug Recognition Evaluator, the DRE program, and that was where police officers were enticing people to take drugs so that they could learn the physiological symptoms of different kinds of intoxication. In theory, right?
But so what redneck came up with that idea?
Well, right. It was the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the IACP, is a pretty dubious kind of military-industrial type organization, and they love expanding the war on drugs, which to me is a pretty big issue. It's a very intrinsically corrupt system, and so the DRE lawsuit is going forward. A good friend of mine.
I don't mean to laugh. It seems serious.
Yeah, but it's funny too, just because it's so absurd, and obviously no one at the Capitol wants to talk about it. That's for sure. And so there's a bunch of plaintiffs on that, so that's going forward. And then my good friend, attorney Nathan Hansen, that I've also done some design work for, he's one of the lead attorneys, and another attorney out east who specializes in human rights in terms of experimentation is really working on pushing this forward, addressing the lack of institutional oversight and the general unethical problems. But the Attorney General is trying to, you know, get the case thrown out of court and doesn't want to let this go on. So I think that stuff like that, stuff like the fossil fuels, those are really, you know, the Pipeline 67 thing coming up, and this train car crash that spilled tar sands oil. Those are the important issues, you know.
What about this Frisk thing going out in New York, the stop and frisk deal? Are you guys involved in that? I mean, Minnesotans don't know about that because it doesn't happen here, but in New York, there's quite a bit going on. I mean, Cornell West has been, you know, out front on this issue.
Well, I think Occupy people have always been interested in doing cop watch and working with Communities Unite Against Police Brutality and other groups. So I think as, you know, kind of summer club season starts and stuff, people are going to start working more on cop watch and police brutality issues. So I'm really hoping to see, like, people being able to cooperate and hold all these power structures accountable.
Just being able to stop citizens without probable cause and then saying that you can't film in a public space seems pretty outrageous to most Americans, I would think.
As well as other things that kind of happen pretty routinely in downtown Minneapolis. So that's yet another issue that I think a lot of people will want to engage in.
Okay. So. Well, good. Where can folks go to learn more about what you're up to these days?
Well, you know, Occupy is a very fluid thing, and so there is a Facebook.com/OccupyMN and Twitter.com/OccupyMN that's edited by a, you know, the media committee editorial people, and then there's also Occupy Homes has a website at occupyhomesmn.org. OccupyMN.org is run by somebody else, and that's kind of being revamped, and there's a bunch of, you know, discussion groups on Facebook and that kind of thing that are run by different folks. So all this stuff just kind of keeps rolling around, you know, and under different names, labels, what have you. But I think it's rolling. So
great. Well, great to have you on, Dan. It's always good to catch up with you and find out what's going on in the places that the media doesn't pay attention to, or as you mentioned, the people at the Capitol don't always hear about. So
they don't. We don't have any paid lobbyists. It's too bad.
Well, that's unfortunate downside of being in a movement, I guess. But it's good to see you, and good luck. All right, that's all we have time for tonight, folks. Thanks for joining us for tonight's program. I want to thank our earlier guest, Representative Dean Erdahl, Republican, and DFL Senator John Marty for joining us. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at MNCapNews and on Facebook at Minnesota Capitol Conversations. If you send us a question, we'll ask it on the show, just like we did tonight. For more political news and analysis from the Capitol, tune in every Wednesday morning at 7:40 a.m., although tomorrow morning it'll be on 7:10 a.m. at KFAI 90.3 radio, where I spend about 10 minutes catching people up on all the events up here at the Capitol. And check out mncapitalnews.com. We had media production assistance tonight from Cliff Dahlberg, our media production assistant, and our producer was Catherine Laudenslager. I'm Marty Owings for my co-host Paul Gardner, who couldn't be here tonight. So long, everybody. See you at the Capitol.